The crossing of the Red Sea. Imagine for a moment that you are fleeing from slavery, running for your life through the desert, and suddenly you find yourself facing an apparently insurmountable barrier, an immense sea ahead of you, and a furious army behind you. What would you do? This impossible situation happened more than 3,000 years ago, and forever changed the course of human history. Today, we're going to dive into the most epic narrative of escape and liberation ever told, the crossing of the Red Sea by the Israelites. But prepare yourself, because this story goes far beyond what you imagine. If you're curious about the great mysteries of ancient history and want to understand how extraordinary events shaped entire civilizations, then you're in the right place. Our journey begins in ancient Egypt, in the period that historians place around 1300 to 1200 BC, during the 19th Egyptian dynasty. The Egypt of this period was a world power, with monumental constructions that still impress us today, and an empire that extended across vast regions of the Middle East and Africa. However, within this prosperous empire, there existed a population that lived under conditions of servitude. The Israelites, descendants of Jacob, also known as Israel. According to biblical accounts, the Israelites had arrived in Egypt during a period of severe famine, invited by Joseph, who had become an important figure in Egyptian administration. Initially well received, as generations passed and dynasties changed, their situation deteriorated drastically. They became an enslaved workforce, used in great Egyptian constructions, including the storage cities of Pithom and Ramesses. Oppression increased when a new pharaoh, whom some scholars identify as Ramesses II, began to fear the population growth of the Israelites. Seeing them as a potential internal threat, especially in case of war, the pharaoh intensified persecution. It was in this context that Moses was born, a figure who would become central not only in Israelite history, but in the formation of Western religious thought. The story of Moses is fascinating in itself. Born in a period when the pharaoh had ordered the death of all male Israelite babies, he was saved by the pharaoh's own daughter, who found him floating in the Nile River inside a basket. Raised in the Egyptian court, Moses had access to the best education of the time, learning about administration, military affairs, religion, and probably about the deepest Egyptian mysteries. But now comes the part that will surprise you. Did you know that before becoming the liberator of his people, Moses spent 40 years in the desert as a fugitive? That's right. After killing an Egyptian supervisor who was mistreating an Israelite, Moses fled to the land of Midian, where he became a shepherd and started a family. It was during this period of exile that he had his most transformative experience. On Mount Horeb, also known as Mount Sinai, Moses had an encounter that would change not only his life, but the course of history. There, before a bush that burned without being consumed, he received the mission to return to Egypt and lead his people out of slavery. This mystical experience marked the beginning of a series of extraordinary events that would culminate in the crossing of the Red Sea. Moses' return to Egypt was not easy. Accompanied by his brother Aaron, he presented himself before the pharaoh with a seemingly simple demand: let the Israelite people go to worship their God in the desert. The pharaoh's response was categorical. Not only did he deny the request, but he intensified the oppression on the Israelites even more. What followed was a series of 10 plagues that, according to the biblical account, devastated Egypt. Waters turned to blood, infestations of frogs, lice and flies, death of cattle, boils, hail, locusts, darkness, and finally, the death of the Egyptian firstborn. Each of these plagues was seen as a direct attack on the Egyptian gods, demonstrating the supremacy of the God of the Israelites over the entire Egyptian pantheon. But here's an interesting perspective. You might not know, many modern scholars have tried to find natural explanations for these plagues. Some suggest they could have been a consequence of a volcanic eruption on the island of Santorini, which would have caused climatic and environmental changes throughout the region. Others propose that a series of interconnected natural phenomena could explain the sequence of events. Regardless of the explanation one accepts, the psychological and social impact of these catastrophes on ancient Egypt must have been devastating. The 10th plague, the death of the firstborn, was the final, an event that broke the pharaoh's resistance. In a single night, according to the account, the firstborn of every Egyptian family died, from the pharaoh's house to that of the last servant. This night became known as Passover, when the Israelites marked their doors with lamb's blood to be spared from the plague. Finally, the pharaoh gave in. He not only allowed the Israelites to leave, but practically expelled them from Egypt. The Israelites left hastily, taking with them not only their belongings, but also many treasures they had received from the terrified Egyptians. According to estimates based on the biblical text, about 600,000 men, plus women and children, left Egypt that historic night, an exodus of massive proportions. But wait, because the story is just beginning to get really interesting. Have you ever wondered why Moses didn't take the people by the most direct route to the Promised Land? The answer will impress you. The most obvious route would be to follow the road that connected Egypt to Palestine, known as the Way of the Land of the Philistines. This was a well-established commercial route, with water wells and supply posts. However, this route was heavily militarized, with Egyptian garrisons and fortresses along the way. The biblical text explains that God did not lead them by this way so that they would not be discouraged by facing war immediately after leaving slavery. Instead, the Israelites were led by a route that would take them to the desert, toward the Red Sea. This apparently strange decision had profound implications. It meant they would have to trust completely in divine leadership, as they ventured into unknown and hostile territory. During this initial journey, the Israelites experienced extraordinary manifestations of divine guidance. During the day, a pillar of cloud guided them. During the night, a pillar of fire illuminated them. This phenomenon allowed them to travel continuously, both day and night, maintaining an accelerated pace to distance themselves as much as possible from Egypt. Meanwhile, in the Egyptian royal palace, a dramatic change was happening. The pharaoh, after the initial emotion of relief from the end of the plagues, began to reconsider his decision. The loss of such a significant workforce represented a devastating economic blow to Egypt. Moreover, allowing an enslaved population to simply leave established a dangerous precedent that could inspire other revolts. Wounded pride also played a crucial role. The pharaoh was considered a living divinity, son of the Egyptian gods. To have been humiliated by a foreign god and by a fugitive ex-prince was unacceptable. The decision to pursue the Israelites was not just political or economic, it was a matter of restoring the pharaoh's dignity and divine authority. The Egyptian army that set out in pursuit of the Israelites was formidable. It included 600 chosen war chariots, plus all the other chariots of Egypt, each with their respective officers. Egyptian war chariots were the most advanced weapons of the time, equivalent to modern tanks, pulled by trained horses and manned by experienced warriors. They represented the most sophisticated military power available in the ancient world. Now, here's the moment that defines the entire narrative. The Israelites, after several days of journey, arrived at a place called Pi-Hahiroth, near the Red Sea. It was a strategic location, but also a potential trap, with the sea ahead and mountains on both sides. There were few escape routes when the Egyptian army was sighted, and that's exactly what happened. Israelite lookouts soon reported a dust cloud on the horizon. The pharaoh's army was approaching. Rapidly, panic spread through the camp. Many Israelites turned against Moses, questioning bitterly, "Why did you bring us out of Egypt? Wasn't it better to die there than to perish in the desert?" This moment reveals something deep about human nature, how quickly we can forget past liberations when we face new challenges. The Israelites, who only a few days before had celebrated their freedom, now romanticized their life of slavery in Egypt. This psychological pattern is something we still see today in many situations of change and uncertainty. Moses, however, demonstrated the leadership that would define him. He remained calm and confident, assuring the people that they would witness an even greater liberation. His words echoed through the centuries, "Fear not, stand still, and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will show to you today. For the Egyptians whom you have seen today, you shall see them again, no more forever." But you must be wondering, where exactly did this crossing happen? This is one of the most debated questions among historians and archaeologists. The traditional location of the crossing has been the subject of intense academic debate. The Hebrew term Yam Suf, traditionally translated as Red Sea, literally means Sea of Reeds or Sea of Rushes. This translation suggests that the crossing site may not have been the Red Sea proper, but rather a marshy region with many reeds. Several theories have been proposed for the exact location. Some scholars suggest that the crossing occurred in the Gulf of Suez, the western extension of the Red Sea. Others propose locations further north, such as the Bitter Lakes or even Lake Manzale near the Mediterranean. Each location has different implications for our understanding of the event, regardless of the exact location. What happened next was extraordinary. Moses stretched out his hand over the waters, and a strong east wind blew all that night, dividing the waters and creating a dry path through the middle of the sea. The waters became like walls on both sides, allowing the Israelites to pass on dry ground. The biblical description of this event is impressively detailed. It was not a momentary separation of the waters, but a process that lasted all night, allowing a multitude of hundreds of thousands of people, along with their flocks and belongings, to cross in an organized manner. The wind not only separated the waters, but also dried the seabed, making it passable. Some modern researchers have tried to find natural explanations for this phenomenon. Oceanographic studies have shown that, under specific wind and tide conditions, it's possible for certain shallow areas of water bodies to be temporarily exposed. However, the precise scale and timing described in the biblical account make any purely natural explanation extremely unlikely. While the Israelites were crossing, the Egyptians hesitated. They could see the dry path, but they also perceived that this was not a natural situation. However, driven by determination to recover their slaves and restore national honor, the Egyptian army decided to proceed with the pursuit. What happened during this pursuit in the dry seabed reveals fascinating details about the mentality and military strategy of the time. The war chariots, which were a decisive advantage on open terrain, began to face difficulties in the still wet soil of the seabed. Wheels got stuck in the mud, horses struggled to maintain pace, and the organized military formation began to disintegrate. It was at this critical moment that the Egyptians began to realize they were facing forces beyond their understanding. According to the account, some began to shout, "Let us flee from the face of Israel, because the Lord fights for them against the Egyptians." However, it was too late to retreat. When the Israelites completed the crossing and reached the opposite shore safely, Moses once again stretched out his hand over the waters. The waters returned with full force, covering the chariots, horsemen, and all of Pharaoh's army. According to the biblical text, there remained not so much as one of them. The magnitude of this catastrophe for Egypt cannot be underestimated. The loss of an entire army, including the best war chariots and elite soldiers, represented a devastating military and economic blow. Beyond material losses, the psychological impact was immense. The apparently invincible power of the Pharaoh had been completely broken. For the Israelites, this event became the defining moment of their national identity. There, on the shore of the sea, they were no longer a group of fugitive slaves, but a people who had witnessed direct divine intervention in their history. The crossing of the Red Sea became the foundational event of their faith and collective identity. The immediate response of the Israelites was celebration and worship. Moses led the men in a victory song, while his sister Miriam led the women in dances and celebration with tambourines. This moment of collective jubilation solidified the shared experience that would unite this people for generations to come. But the consequences of the crossing of the Red Sea extended far beyond the Israelite people. News of this extraordinary victory spread rapidly throughout the region. To neighboring peoples, the Israelites were no longer seen merely as refugees, but as a people protected by a formidable divine power. The cultural and religious impact of this event echoed through the millennia. The crossing of the Red Sea became a universal symbol of liberation from oppression, inspiring freedom movements around the world. During the era of American slavery, for example, Negro spirituals frequently referenced this story as a source of hope and encouragement. In Jewish tradition, the crossing of the Red Sea is remembered annually during Passover, connecting each generation to the liberation experience of their ancestors. For Christians, the event prefigures themes of salvation and spiritual renewal. In Islam, Moses is venerated as one of the greatest prophets, and his victory over Pharaoh is seen as an example of faith's triumph over oppression. Archaeologically, the search for evidence of the Red Sea crossing continues to fascinate researchers. Although definitive physical evidence of the event itself has not been found, this is not surprising considering it was an aquatic phenomenon that occurred more than 3,000 years ago. However, there is indirect evidence that supports the historicity of Israelite presence in Egypt and their eventual exodus. Egyptian records mention groups of Semitic workers, and there is archaeological evidence of Canaanite settlements in the Nile Delta during the relevant period. Furthermore, the wealth of Egyptian cultural and geographical details preserved in biblical narratives suggests genuine familiarity with ancient Egypt. The influence of the Red Sea crossing on Western literature, art, and music is immeasurable. From Renaissance paintings to Hollywood films, from classical operas to modern popular songs, this story continues to inspire creators in all media. The image of waters dividing has become one of the most iconic in all of Western tradition. What makes this story particularly powerful is its universality. Although rooted in a specific historical and cultural context, it speaks to fundamental human experiences. The desire for freedom, the struggle against oppression, the need for faith in the face of the impossible, and the hope for a better future. The crossing of the Red Sea also established patterns for understanding divine intervention in history. For millions of people throughout the centuries, this event demonstrated that even the most desperate situations can be transformed, that no human power is absolute, and that final justice will prevail over oppression. Today, more than 3,000 years later, the crossing of the Red Sea continues to be one of the most studied, debated, and celebrated narratives in human history. Whether seen as literal history, spiritual allegory, or cultural symbol, it remains relevant to people of all backgrounds and traditions. This story reminds us that the most desperate moments often precede the greatest that true leadership emerges in times of crisis, and that some events transcend their historical circumstances to become a permanent part of human consciousness. That the crossing of the Red Sea was not just an event in ancient history. It was a moment that redefined the possible and continues to inspire all those who face their own seemingly impassable waters. If this journey through humanity's most epic story of liberation has sparked your curiosity about other great mysteries and events that shaped our civilization, subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and share this video with your friends. In the comments, tell us which aspect of this story impressed you most, and don't forget to activate notifications so you don't miss our next dives into the fascinating secrets of ancient history. Until the next historical adventure.